Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Elena Westbrook, and I am one of your worship associates. Many of our team members are involved in the service this morning, and that is a good symbol for how we do things at Community UU as a team, bringing together lots of varied ideas and perspectives to create experiences that, we hope, stretch our minds and fill our hearts. Our first homily this morning is from Joyce Thompson. Come on up, Joyce.
Back in 2021, it was during the pandemic, so I was getting most of my exercise by walking all around the neighborhood. It was too dangerous to go to the gym. And after a while, my left hip started hurting really bad. So I went to see an orthopedic surgeon, someone, in fact, who was recommended by someone in our congregation. And I told the doctor my symptoms. He sent me down the hall for x-rays of my hips and came back. He said, it's bone on your left hip, and you need to get a hip replacement within the next few months. Well, it was COVID. I wasn't doing anything but sitting at home, and now I couldn't walk either. So I scheduled it as quickly as I could. And the next few weeks were taken up with preparing for the surgery with the help of the doctor's nursing staff. But I did not see the doctor again until the day of the surgery. On that day, I was lying on the gurney, ready to be wheeled into the operating room, when he showed up at the side of the gurney. We said hello to one another, and then, much to my surprise, he said, do you mind if I pray? I was very surprised by that, but I said, no, it's okay. And he quickly knelt at the side of the gurney and said a short prayer aloud. And then off I went into the operating room. Now, when I told my friend in California about this happening, and her husband said if that had been him, he would have jumped off the gurney and gone running for his life. And Dan was joking, well, kind of, but I get his point, because when you're lying there about to be put under anesthesia so that some strange man you've met one time can slice you open and rearrange your inner parts, you would like to believe that he has the training and skill and experience to do it without needing to call for divine intervention. And especially because God may have been busy answering someone else's prayers and not had time to assist with my surgery. Well, everything turned out okay. And I remember thinking at the time that two things: this doctor must be some sort of religious fanatic, and that this would never have happened in California, where I come from. No way, ever. But when we decided that we were going to do this service about science and religion and how they can come together, I started thinking about this experience. So I decided to look into what other doctors believe about God. And what I found surprised me, and it made me see that medicine is actually a proving ground where science and religion come together and coexist fairly amicably. And I also learned that, though I'm sure this doctor was farther out than most, that he was not quite the outlier that I had thought he was. There was a study of what doctors believe about God, what physicians believe about God, that was done in 2005 at the University of Chicago. And I know that's a while ago, but this is the study that's referred to most often. It was published in the Journal of General Internal Medicine. Now, previous studies and surveys had shown that advanced educational levels especially in the natural sciences, was consistently associated with a decrease in the likelihood of belief in faith in a deity. The more educated you are, the less likely you are to believe. And one study found that only 39% of scientists believe in God, and among elite scientists, meaning scientists who belong to the American Academy of the Sciences, the figure was 7%. And another finding statistic was that individuals who enjoy financial security are less likely to believe in God by quite a margin. So these are two things that kind of reference the gap between elitism and populism, I guess. However, physicians completely flip this on its head. Doctors are widely considered to be highly educated and financially stable. Yet, the study at the University of Chicago found that 76% of American doctors said they believe in God. 76%, as compared to 39% of the scientists. Now, modern medicine is basically secular. It's spent the last 200 years separating itself from spirit and religion. Doctors study biology, chemistry, and physics, and the tools they use are scientific: blood tests, x-rays, and other scans, and they treat with tools that are developed by science, such as medications developed in placebo-controlled studies in laboratories. So what is it that makes them different? Well, I think one key is that doctors are not in laboratories. They're working, not conducting experiments, but they're working with patients, with human beings, and doing so during some of the most difficult moments of their patients' lives, as their patients face issues of illness and disability and death, and often have to make value-based decisions. And sometimes they turn to their doctors for help in making sense and meaning to their suffering. Sometimes they'll ask if their doctor believes in God, or they'll ask their doctor to pray with them. And I think even if doctors went into the practice without having much religion or spirituality, they would come to see that more is needed than just science. If a 45-year-old man were to ask his doctor, "Doc, why do I have lung cancer? I'm so young," it might be appropriate for her to say, "Well, sir, it's probably because you smoke 2 packs of cigarettes every day for the past 20 years. But when a parent asks, "Doctor, why is my infant dying?" or "Why does my 21-year-old daughter have a brain tumor?" even if there is a scientific explanation, that is not necessarily what is needed. And more recently, medicine is moving a little bit more towards having a holistic approach. Farr Curlin, MD, one of the authors of the study at the University of Chicago, also wrote, "We suspect that people who combine an aptitude for science with an interest in religion and an affinity for public service are particularly attracted to medicine. A responsibility to care for those who are suffering and the rewards of helping others in need resonates through most religious traditions." Now, we hear all the time about artificial intelligence taking over the field of medicine, and it's already here. Artificial intelligence helps answer questions that people have. It helps do robotic surgery and develop pharmaceutical things in the lab. And even the other day, we had our CPR training here, And we found out that our automated external defibrillator, once we turn it on, it will tell us what to do, and it will not allow us to make a mistake. So it is here. So someone thought to ask artificial intelligence what it thinks about the subject of science and religion. And its answer was, yes, religion and science can exist harmoniously. They provide different perspectives on our complex nature. I'm afraid, though, that when AI really takes over, it's going to lean much more heavily on science and be very, very factual. When that happens, I may very much miss my doctor and his prayers.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Joyce. I appreciate that. So the origins of this service lie in something called the Clergy Letter Project. That letter was a statement signed by more than 17,000 priests, rabbis, ministers, and imams stating that evolution is not incompatible with religion. And these leaders encouraged everyone to understand the scientific findings that scaffold all of modern biology. Actually, almost 700 UU ministers have signed on to that letter as of yesterday. So the organization started this thing called Darwin Sunday. We celebrated it a few times. It's on the second Sunday of February. This year, instead of Darwin, the official theme is religion, science, and the common good. We, of course, are not good at following instructions, so we picked our own date and changed the theme. Why would we spend an entire worship service looking at the relationship between science and religion? Well, we do it because humans are meaning-making animals. We understand ourselves and the world by telling stories to each other. As soon as our children learn to talk, they start asking why. Well, Unitarian Universalists have taken that and turned it into a spiritual value. It is our fourth principle that we covenant to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We believe that asking questions is a really important part of what makes us human and critical to our growth. But as Alan Lightman observed, and we definitely see around here, our society is polarized now by where we seek those answers. Do you find them in Scripture, or do you find them in a laboratory? Are these two temples of truth really incompatible? Stephen Jay Gould, who wrote a number of popular books about paleontology and evolution, held that science and religion are different and should just stay in their own lanes. He didn't think questions about the soul or consciousness had any place in science. He wasn't one of the new atheists. He wasn't Richard Dawkins. He didn't think that religion should just go away and be quiet and was doing damage. Just stay in your lane. Interestingly enough, on the religious side, I have noticed that young Earth creationists don't seem to be refusing heart surgery or life-saving antibiotics. I mean, there are some who reject medical care on the grounds that God will heal them, but really, even most of the people who reject vaccines are grateful to receive the latest treatment for strokes or pneumonia. They might want to argue about evolution, but they're not rejecting all scientific progress. They just don't want to hear about anything that would challenge their most deeply held beliefs. And I can sympathize with that. Call it segregation of thought, if you like. Equal or not, some thinkers would say we just need to be separate. So I was intrigued by Alan Lightman's characterization of spiritual materialism, where he says, I'm a materialist, but he still holds open room for mystery and wonder and the transcendent. Perhaps we could suggest a similar approach for the young earth creationists. They could think of themselves as the rational religious, holding on to their faith without denying the evidence of evolution, biology, and geology. My childhood minister out in Lubbock was Dr. Dudley Strain at First Christian, and I think he might have fit into that category. Shortly before he retired, I heard him give a talk about Genesis and evolution, and he talked about how we can understand that passage in Genesis about the 7 days of creation as being both true and mythical. A day doesn't have to mean our current Earth day of 24 hours. Do you know the Earth day used to be much shorter? The Earth used to spin faster. God's day could have been millions of years long. Well, and that's one way to reconcile the Bible and science. Michael Dowd, who is a famous UU speaker, took a similar approach. How many people know who Michael Dowd is? Familiar with him? I am sorry to tell you, I learned that he actually passed away in October. He died last. He'd had cancer. He'd been in treatment. I thought he had recovered, but when I looked him up recently, he died just a few months ago. He wrote a book called Thank God for Evolution and went around the country sharing the good news of evolution with audiences all over the country. And I love the angle he takes on this. And Dowd has a lot to say, and I highly recommend his books, but I'm just going to pull out one little bit from it. He talks about science and data as being day language, concrete, measurable, provable, useful for commerce and building rockets to Mars. Religion speaks in night language. So picture a group of people, maybe some prehistoric humans, or maybe your family on a camping trip. It's been a long, busy day. Lots of things have happened, and you're sitting around a campfire and telling stories. Do you remember that time Johnny picked up a spider and it jumped? You tell stories. This is night language. It's metaphor. It's parable. It's the language of mythology and religion. So when we think about these two perspectives, data versus metaphor, day language and night language, it's really easy to see how they can be complementary. They don't have to stay in their own lanes. They're describing the same phenomena sometimes, but in spreadsheets or in stories. They're just two separate ways of knowing. And I think the more ways of knowing we have, the better off we are. And really, for me, the most interesting ideas are positioned right at that intersection between science and religion, in the areas where some scientists fear to tread. Studies like consciousness. So, one working definition of consciousness is what it's like to be something. This is a definition that scientists and philosophers are likely to use because it gives you something to hold on to instead of saying consciousness. Well, is it the soul? Is it, everything about you that's non-physical? So the working definition, what it's like to be something. It's subjective. It's experiential. The question is consciousness an emergent property of the physical brain and nothing more? Or is it some separate thing that exists in a non-physical realm and yet somehow interacts with the human brain to govern our thoughts or to cause feelings. So these are the two things. There's materialism, there's just the brain. Consciousness is either an emergent property or an illusion. There are those who hold that the feelings and the experiences we have, pure illusion. There's nothing there. It's just the workings of your brain, no more mysterious than the workings of your hand. Then there's dualism, which posits this separate consciousness out there somewhere. They're not really sure what it is or where it lives, but they figure there has to be a ghost in the machine. That's dualism. So I've recently been reading this book by Philip Goff, G-O-F-F, called Galileo's Error, about a third path that I find fascinating. It's called panpsychism. It's not really what it sounds like. It is not animism. But what he says Galileo's error was taking everything subjective and experiential out of the data so that they could do math with it. If you want to know how long it takes a stone to fall from the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, you don't care what color it is. That doesn't matter. You don't care if it's pretty or not. You want to know how much it weighs and what shape it is so you can calculate the air resistance and figure out how fast it falls. This became physics. But by taking out all of the things we associate with consciousness, qualia, because they didn't affect the calculations, we're ignoring a huge part of reality. And it is our human experience. I would hold that it is not an illusion that we have experiences and feelings and a subjective life. So Goff supports this panpsychism, which says consciousness is the inherent nature of everything. Our brains, trees, yes, rocks, but increasingly simpler as the objects get simpler. And so even an electron, its inherent nature is consciousness. Now, does it have the same kind of consciousness as a human? Of course not. But there is some level of consciousness in everything. I find this idea fascinating. So Goff says there's a hole of inherent nature that physicists have just been ignoring. They talk about what matter does and not what it is. So if we wanted to define what it is, well, maybe what it is consciousness. And it fits in very nicely with Fred Alan Wolf's book, The Spiritual Universe, where he uses quantum physics and math to prove that there is only one consciousness in the world. There has to be a consciousness, and there can only be one in order for matter to persist. Very complicated. I'm not going to get into it today. But if you're interested, those are two things to look up, Galileo's Error and the Spiritual Universe. You get the idea. The most interesting ideas, really, and I think the best opportunity for spiritual growth comes in this place where science and religion meet. So we would be wise not to reject either one. My husband, an engineer, is fond of saying, without data, you're just making stuff up. The flip side of that is my job is making stuff up. I'm a marketing writer. It's what I do. But also without story, we can't make sense of the data. All the spreadsheets and statistical analyses in the world cannot feed our spirits the way the story of Grandmother Spider stealing the sun in her web does. We have both hearts and brains, after all. And so in order to live the richest lives and remain open to truth wherever it arises, I think we have to believe the data, but live by the metaphor.